Undocumented migrants are arrested outside an Obama fundraiser in Chicago as they demand a halt to deportations. Will their voices be heard in Washington? You're watching Inside Story, America's from Washington. Hello, I'm Shihab Ratansi. They tried to take their fight directly to the US president on Wednesday, calling for immediate action. But the US president declined a similar request to halt deportations earlier this year, saying that he's focused on, quote, getting reform passed and not easing up on enforcement, end quote. More than 400,000 people were deported last year, a record high. Next month, the US Senate is expected to begin debating a bill that's heavy on enforcement. The proposal was put together by a group of Republicans and Democrats. It would put 11 million undocumented immigrants on a path towards citizenship, but only after border security provisions are met, including the deployment of the National Guard to build a border fence along the US-Mexico border, as well as the funding of more than 3,500 customs agents. Only after such security measures are enforced will undocumented workers have a chance to gain legal status in the US. Joining me now from Chicago is Uriel Sanchez Molina. He is one of the 12 who were arrested yesterday and later released. Here in DC, we're joined by Lene Erickson. She's the Deputy Director of the Social Policy and Politics Program at the Third Way think tank. And by Sarahi Uribe, the National Campaign Coordinator for the National Day Laborer Organizing Network. Uriel, first of all, what exactly was the Immigration Youth Justice League trying to explain to the president in its protest yesterday in Chicago?
The Immigrant Youth Justice League, just like myself, as really an undocumented immigrant, as a youth undocumented immigrant-led organization, have seen the president's administration and his policies and the current rhetoric and discussions going on Capitol Hill as not sufficient in addressing the deportation policies of his administration. And that's really where it came down to for the action yesterday. So I did participate. I did get arrested yesterday and was later released that same day. And it was a blockade of traffic in front of that very hotel. And it was really to bring attention to the fact that, you know, the president is going to be coming into town. He's going to be blocking traffic coming in through Chicago. And at the same time, we are doing the same thing. But really, there's very different reasons, right? There's a president that's coming in to remobilize his base, his Democratic base for the next year's elections. And then there's us, mobilizing really our base and trying to get the president to hear us out and listen to us, because we are speaking out, and we are speaking out very loudly.
All right, well, I mean, that's key then, Lene, is a major part of that base. Over 70% of the Latino community who voted for President Obama are being told by the president that he cares deeply about immigration reform and about the problems being faced by members of the community. Meanwhile, record deportations, which are destroying families in this country. Is it possible to be both concerned and act in this way?
Absolutely. You know, I think the president recognizes that there's real human suffering happening because of the brokenness of our immigration system, but he realizes the only way to truly fix that is to get immigration reform done, and that's exactly what he's working to do.
Sari, would you accept that then? This is simply the price of progress, though. You have to, unfortunately, go through this process if you really want immigration reform.
I would disagree. The president could absolutely do more. He could administratively decide to put a moratorium on the deportations. This president is the deporter-in-chief. He has deported more people than any other president in United States history. He has expanded interior enforcement in an unprecedented way. Essentially, every police officer in the United States right now is a gateway to deportation, and we can thank President Obama for that. So as a Latina, I'm offended that the president thinks that he can be a champion of immigration reform while at the same time being this deporter-in-chief.
Uriel, I mean, what do you make of that argument as an activist then? Look, it's all very well protesting, but if you want to get movement on Capitol Hill, President Obama has to continue the deportations to show he's acting in good faith to those who don't want any immigration reform.
Well, I'm glad you asked that, that question, because I've been considering myself as a member of my organization, as a undocumented activist, as a student, also a college student, for the past 3 years. In those past 3 years, really, there has been organizing. In the past decade, there has been that organizing. The president wasn't vocal about immigration in 2008, 2009, and really, even in 2010, when the discussions around the DREAM Act were going on, a lot of senatorial leaders, the Gang of Eight, for example, weren't very vocal. They weren't public about their support for those bills. It wasn't really until there was actual organizing on the ground from community organizations pushing the president, pushing those senators, and pushing really the Gang of Eight and other congressional leaders to act on it. So there is this, obviously, there's always going to be this balance, right, between, allowing some space for progress to be made and the politics and the, yanking back and forth. But the president is the president, and he is in a seat of power right now where he can do much more. In the past, he has issued a memo to give some relief to undocumented youth. Now, that in itself is good. That's good for myself, for example. I'm an undocumented young person who came here at the age of 3, so that gave me some protection. And now I'm able to be a college student, a biology student, what Obama, touts as the next generation of immigrants, these STEM students. But that does not acknowledge or really acknowledge, the realities of what our families are facing. My father, when he goes to work, is still undocumented. He still faces that threat from Obama's administration of ICE raiding his workplace and arresting him and deporting him. My mom can't work because she's chronically ill. And at that same time, Obama's administration is pushing to restrict, healthcare access to undocumented immigrants through the healthcare reform law and through the current immigration reform laws that are being discussed. So since she's at home, and she's not working, she's still under that same threat. ICE could still come knocking at the door at any moment, arrest her, and out of confusion or whatever, have her be placed in that detention and deportation system that is deporting up to 1,100 people every single day. These are people that are families. There are workers. They include this what Obama calls dreamers, that are being drawn into the system. And really, it's funny because yesterday, right before I did the action, Obama's campaign sent out a short email, those constant daily emails that they send out every now and then. And in it, it was Obama's message saying the work of community organizing is essential. And that's what he built his campaign on, community organizing, and really kind of a community style of campaign. And so I hold the same belief that we should not be settling for any less. In fact, we should be pushing even more. And right now is the perfect time to be doing it, because the way the direction, the discussion of immigration reform is going, and the discussions that the Gang of Eight and other congressional leaders are having and the president are having are discussions that are leaving out undocumented immigrants,
right.
A lot of families that are in deportation proceedings, really leaving out the true concerns of people like myself.
Right, and we'll look at actually what is on the table and being discussed in a moment. But Lene, can you see that though? Then it's very difficult for many in the community to say, okay, we'll accept this. Trust me, no, we're working on it. Idea when their families are at constant risk and they're living in constant fear. And in fact, he's doubling down on deportation policies in the meantime, and is a record deporter.
I think absolutely, even the president would agree that people should continue to push for reform, and he has asked people to do that. But much like with the LGBT community and his support for repealing the Defense of Marriage Act, he hasn't stopped enforcing laws that he doesn't like. He can't just unilaterally change things, because he knows that the best way...
He hasn't focused even more on the LGBT community.
But the best way to actually get action for these folks is to convince people to move forward politically, because he has, in fact, done certain things like the deferred action for the Dreamers, which was, in many ways a big success and something we really supported. But at the same time, many Dreamers haven't undertaken that process because it's not permanent for them.
Right,
so
exactly.
They need to have a permanent solution, and that's what the president is really focused on.
Help us understand in the work that you do then, why it's just not easy to argue, look, we're working on this. What this 400,000 quota that's been set for this year actually means on a daily basis.
Well, you can't tell someone who's about to be deported that you're talking to in detention, immigration reform is coming, because they're already on the plane back to Honduras. So I'm talking about the case of Roger, a man whose wife was in a national press conference with union leaders. Even President Trump of the AFL-CIO, the biggest union in America, is calling for a moratorium on the deportations, because it makes no sense to deport people who are months away from possibly gaining some legalization and relief. Sadly, Yvette, this woman from Massachusetts, her husband was deported 3 days after doing that national press conference. Her husband, who is now in Honduras, is on the front page of every Honduran newspaper. This is an international story. This is a story of real people who can't wait, and you can't say, let's wait to human suffering. And about doing immigration reform and doing a moratorium on the deportations, why can't we have both? Why can't we begin the pathway to citizenship with a moratorium on deportations, acknowledging, as I said, that it makes no sense to deport people who may be months away from legalizing?
Well, I think there's a very clear answer to that, which is that the Republicans who do support reform and would immediately say that they can't move forward with anything, and those who oppose reform would use that as the exact reason to pull out of the debate. So I think it would shut things down immediately.
Well, let's look at the debate that is occurring then. We have this Gang of Eight immigration bill. It has cleared the Senate Judiciary Committee. That perhaps gives it a better chance on the Senate floor. How are things looking, even with the limitations of this bill and the process? How are things looking for this bill's passing through the Senate and the House, indeed, Lene?
I think the Senate bill is really the only game in town, and I think for folks that are really committed to reform, they need to get behind it and be very vocal about their support and continue to push for it, because the Gang of Eight held together through the committee process, which was a real benchmark. The question was, are we going to be able to have Republicans oppose amendments that would take things down from their side, and have Democrats do the same and stand up against very powerful groups in their own bases, and both sides of the Gang of Eight did that, and I think that bodes very well for them being able to stick together on the floor.
Well, and I mean, now that there are suggestions that opponents will be introducing these poison pill amendments to try and split any bipartisan consensus there is, and then there are doubts about the House as well, and the general reports that those in the Republican Party are beginning to think, hang on, after all of this, it may not even mean that it'll translate into votes for the Republican Party. And of course, that's the only reason, frankly, that they're doing this, right?
I think for some folks, that's certainly a motivating factor. But I think those who've been really committed to reform, for several years and talking about getting something done are still very much in the game. And, there are other voices that have been saying since the beginning, we don't need to do this. We just need to focus on other groups to build our base. And they're continuing to say that, but nothing's really changed on that front.
Well, let's take a closer look at the bill in that case. The major impact then is going to be on the issue that we began with, though, deportation and securing the border, even though it is unprecedentedly secure. And clearly, this is the first steps, at least, are a bonanza for private security contractors, actually, before we get on to the fate of migrants.
Absolutely. I mean, we're hearing Senator Marco Rubio, who is a member of the Gang of Eight, now say that, you know what, even though I helped craft this bill needs more enforcement in order for us to get the votes. Never mind that the Senate, leader of the Senate, Harry Reid, is saying actually it's going to be very easy to get these 60 votes. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but absolutely that the Gang of Eight has strong ties with the private prison corporations and also security corporations. And as you mentioned, border crossings are at an all-time low. We pour more money in this country to immigration enforcement than we do on the FBI and the DEA combined. So clearly our priorities are skewed. So in terms of immigration enforcement, as immigrant activists, we feel like the moratorium is the down payment for being honest about immigration reform. You mentioned President Obama. I have questions whether President Obama actually is serious about passing immigration reform, or if he just wants this bill to go a certain length and be able to blame the GOP, the Republicans, for making the bill fail. He then gets some more votes in the fall, and he becomes the president that gets to say, I'm trying.
It might rally his base when they're a bit disillusioned, actually.
Absolutely. So we're sick of being the political football of both the GOP and the Democrats. We're willing to work with anyone who's actually serious about providing some real relief. And for us, that down payment is a moratorium on deportations.
Ariel, what do you think of this bill, this Gang of Eight compromise bill that's going through the Senate right now?
What I see, as an activist, as an undocumented immigrant, as a student, and as really a son of immigrants, of undocumented immigrants, is that any bill that includes more enforcement, any bill that includes more internal security, any bill that includes more criminalization of immigrants and the continual detention, those 400,000, that 400,000 quota every year of deportations of really anybody that ICE can catch, I think that is a no-go. I think it is wrong to say that anybody who would want immigration reform to pass, like myself, to get behind that bill, because frankly, from what I'm hearing from the community, is they're not just going to get behind any bill that criminalizes themselves. It really makes no sense at all.
But let's talk about what
my colleague, as my colleague mentioned,
Hang on a second, Ariel. We'll get Lene into the conversation.
Well, let's talk about what this bill does do in addition to enforcement. It has provisions that would allow 11 million people who currently are not able to live their lives and operate and plan their affairs to have a pathway not just to legalization but to citizenship. And that's been a line that people have drawn. And it is what's in the bill. It's what Republicans who are supporting this bill are supporting as a pathway to legalization. It also includes increased immigration writ large, and we're talking about people who are students here who we're now currently sending home. We're talking about people we've educated that can help our own economy. So I think we're overlooking some of the really great pieces of the bill.
And I understand that. I myself am a biology student at the University of Illinois Chicago. I'm a pre-med student. I'm one of those STEM students that Obama is talking about are deported and sent elsewhere, right? These high-achieving students, the students that are, going to help our economy. But I also recognize my parents who are not that, who are under the constant threat of deportation. I understand the benefit that comes out of legalization of my brothers and sisters. I understand the benefits that come out of that. But I also understand the details, the little, evilish details, if I can, of that bill. And
what are the evilish
say that I
details?
Would completely get the details, such as an additional of $4 billion in the immediate next 5 years to the already $18 billion that goes towards border enforcement, for example. The details of maintaining that 400,000 bed quota. That 400,000 bed quota includes already those people that would be saved by legalization. So why continue including that? Why continue including those quotas? It really, it makes no sense that, you have legalization and all this talk, but in the background and behind the curtains, there's really no talk about the continual detention and deportation of all immigrants. I mean, there's really hasn't been made clear as to, who would be safe. As far as I've heard from the president, it's if you're a dreamer, if you're, going to a university and you're a STEM student, you're safe. But what about the worker? What about my mother and father? What about the grandma or the grandpa?
This is the key question.
What about the single?
The key question then is what price will be paid for immigration reform in this long process that we have ahead of us. And it's putting even those who are pro immigration reform into a sort of a difficult position in that case. One group who is strongly in favor of immigration reform are the nuns on the bus. They've been outspoken on a range of social issues. And on Wednesday, they embarked on a national tour to put the case for change. Al Jazeera's Kristen Salumi met up with them and asked Sister Simone Campbell, she's the executive director of Network, a Catholic justice group which has organized the tour, what she makes of the bill being presented to the Senate.
The current proposal that passed out of the Senate committee is a significant step forward. It deals with all of the key issues. Of course, I'd like to tweak some little things, but I'll tell you, we cannot afford to lose this opportunity. So we have got to make sure that comprehensive immigration reform passes soon and well. The basic bill is fine. It would be a significant step forward. Later we can worry about tweaking some details, but we've got to accomplish it now. In 2007, one of the arguments was to do enforcement first. That's what we've been doing. And so we've spent over $100 billion in tough economic time to control the border. It is the most secure it's ever been in our history of our nation. And so now is the time to complete the job. Immigration absolutely is a moral issue because we have a moral responsibility to care for all. And the Hebrew scriptures, all of traditions value the reverence for the stranger, welcoming in those who are at the margins, taking care of those who come to our nation as if they were ourselves. So it's a moral issue for us, but it's also smart economics because 1 out of 4 business in the U.S. is started by an immigrant. And the last time we did immigration reform in '96, the economy grew because immigrants were then able to fully participate, engage in our society, start businesses, employ people, pay taxes, and be a full participating part of our community.
So, Sari, what's interesting then is that even allies on immigration reform say, look, this is a price that we have to pay. But I suppose the sense one's getting from this discussion is deportation isn't a detail that has to be tweaked. In fact, it's actually fundamental to the entire discussion if the issue needs to be sorted out now as a priority.
Absolutely. It's not a bargaining chip as it has been used in the last 5 years that we've been having this debate. I also just want to clarify that we are in favor of immigration reform. I have parents, friends who would benefit from a legalization bill. So I'm not saying at all that I'm not in favor of supporting this. We're desperate for some kind of relief. We haven't had legalization in over 20 years. What I'm saying is that we need to first stop the deportations, right, and we need to fight for something that's better, as Uriel was mentioning. Our job as part of the immigrant rights movement is to fight to ensure that that bill doesn't drift further and further to the right, as sadly I feel like it's starting to with these comments that Senator Marco Rubio is making. Right,
but can you see that then? I mean, that's the entire framing of the discussion, that there's a problem with it. It suggests that there isn't really an understanding of the issue of immigration reform in a bid to make some political deal, which actually in the end is only going to benefit defense contractors.
I think that's not true. I think it's going to benefit the U.S. economy, but I think there is absolutely a role for immigrant advocates to continue to fight for what they think is important in the bill, for religious voices to continue to fight for what they think is important in the bill. But the truth comes down to the fact that this is the best chance we've had for reform in as many years as I've lived in Washington. And we really need to put all of our efforts and our shoulder to the wheel to get this done. And I think that's what the senators in the Gang of Eight have done. And a lot of folks have been talking about these recent comments that Senator Rubio has made, but I really don't see them as that different from the discussion that was happening that was actually a very productive one in committee, where they chose to accept some amendments. They accepted a Grassley amendment that would have changed the enforcement provisions. Right. The Democrats were open to that, but they also rejected a lot of amendments that would have gone way too far. So I think the Gang of Eight is really calibrating this correctly. And
we really don't know Marco Rubio's motivations right now, but what we can look at very briefly, and we've only got like 40 seconds left, Sarah, this package that is on the table, will it help? Will it help the people that you represent, the day laborers? Will it help some of the Uriel's parents, for example? I mean, there seem to be huge hurdles on this 13-year path to citizenship.
I mean, the devil is in the details, as Uriel said. The bill as it's written, absolutely it would help millions of people. The question is, what about those that remain out of the package? Out of the relief, and that's why we're saying, those people don't deserve to be deported necessarily either. No one deserves to be deported. Right. So I'm saying, yes, it would help millions of people. This is the beginning rounds of a really long process. Still remains to be seen what the bill would look like after the House gets a hang of it. But yes, it would help people, but we need a moratorium on the deportations to ease this crisis that we're facing every day.
All right, Sari Uribe, thank you very much. Lene Erickson, thank you. Uriel Sanchez Molina, thank you as well. And that's it from the team in Washington, D.C. for now.